I noticed it a little bit more at the beginning of the offseason, but there was definitely some concern about how good Georgia's secondary is going to be this 2025 season. I'm here to tell you, I think they're going to be more than just fine. I think it's going to be a pretty good group for the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia's defense, well, really all of Georgia's entire roster, but when you look at the frame of it through the defensive lens, they lost a lot of talent to the NFL, and that includes secondary pieces like Dan Jackson and Malachi Starks, All-American and first-round pick Malachi Starks. But here's the thing about Georgia's secondary that I think when there was concern towards the beginning of the offseason that people probably weren't thinking about is that they deal with this every single season. Georgia's secondary deals with this every year. They put out really good players to the NFL. They've got to rely on some younger players. They got to rely on some up-and-coming talent. They've got some veteran leadership. All of that. It happens every single season. They've got to replace it. And the last handful of secondary units for the Georgia Bulldogs, some of them contributors to national championships, have been very, very good. And they've dealt with this pretty much every offseason. I'm going to walk you through the last few off seasons, talking about this 2025 secondary and kind of, well, look, the thing about the 2025 secondary is we don't exactly know who all of the starters are. We know who a couple of the starting pieces are, but we don't know for sure who's starting at a couple of spots. I think about 5 players are competing for 2 of the jobs in the secondary. And I think it's going to be a good competition. But let's walk through the last few years and why those examples are part of why I believe in this year's secondary. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Make sure you are going to dawgpost.com. There's a written version of this story over there on the site that is already published. So make sure you are going and reading that, reading all of Matt's news, about recruiting. We've got deals. We've got a magazine. There's all sorts of stuff going on over there at dawgpost.com. And it can't always happen over here on the YouTube channel, Facebook, wherever you're watching this. So make sure you're checking that out. And I'll be using my written story as a guide to talk to you about this. So real quick, I'm going to kind of run through. I won't spend too much time on it, but I want to run through the last few seasons and why, look, this 2025 secondary has the pieces. So in 2021, safeties, Lewis Seen, a star junior, right? Ended up going to the NFL. Christopher Smith, older talent. Dan Jackson, kind of up-and-coming talent. William Poole, older talent. At corner, they had an older player in Darion Kendrick, a senior who was very good for Georgia, and a younger player in Keely Ringo, the redshirt freshman. So this secondary had a mixture of older talent that was NFL bound, first round bound in Lewis Seen. You had older talent in Christopher Smith, Darion Kendrick, who was the MVP of the Orange Bowl for them, and then Keely Ringo, a freshman, right, who ended up making the play in the national championship. In fact, 3 of them are in this picture right here: Christopher Smith, William Poole, Keely Ringo. I feel like a weatherman trying to do that and go the opposite way, but all 3 of those guys in that picture in the key moment for the Georgia Bulldogs and one of the moments in all of Georgia Bulldog history. So 21 to 22, they lose Lewis Seen, William Poole's a senior, Darion Kendrick, they're gone. So they've got to replace some guys. Well, Christopher Smith's right there. They bring in a true freshman stud in Malachi Starks, who is in there to replace secondary talent. Javon Bullard, someone that waited for his turn to start, only had to wait 1 year because he's a sophomore. He goes in there. Dan Jackson's a part of that. He ends up getting hurt that season. And that corner, Keely Ringo, now a year older. He's starting again, and then Kamari Lassiter, as a true sophomore, is getting his first chance to start. And that secondary ended up being really good. They helped contribute to a national championship in 2022. Keely Ringo is a draft pick, and then Christopher Smith gets drafted as well. In 2023, so they lose a couple of guys in Christopher Smith and Keely Ringo. How do they replace them? Well, Malachi Starks, he's a sophomore. Javon Bullard's a junior. They got Tyke Smith, a transfer who ended up finally getting his turn. Very good for them. And then Dan Jackson, again, a mixture of older talent and younger talent. At corner, Kamari Lassiter, and then Dalen Everett gets his first turn to start, so some younger talent there. What do they do in 2024 when Javon Bullard, Tyke Smith, and Kamari Lassiter all go to the NFL? Well, Malachi Starks, year 3, Dan Jackson, his final year, and then they have a true freshman, KJ Bolden, to replace some of that secondary help. At corner, Dalen Everett, he's starting again. Then you got Julian Humphrey and Daniel Harris, who kind of out of this entire little string of players was the most disappointing, right? Julian Humphrey transfers. So how do they deal with Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson? I said all that to get to this point. They lose NFL talent. Well, they've got a young stud in KJ Bolden who's going to start again. They've got some older guys who have been around in the system, and Janelle Aguero and Ja'Cory Thomas, who are going to compete for those safety spots. They've got 3 transfers that they brought in at safety. Adrian Maddox from UAB, Zion Branch from USC, and Jaden Harris from Miami. They brought in 3 guys who are going to be competing with Janelle Aguero and Ja'Cory Thomas for that star spot and for the safety spot next to KJ Bolden. I liked what I saw at G-Day out of those guys. I thought Jaden Harris, honestly, all 3 of them looked like they could compete for starting jobs. I thought they all made some plays. I think I was the most impressed with Adrian Maddox. At corner, Dalen Everett returns for his senior year. I'll talk about how big that is in a second. They've got Daniel Harris, who has some starting experience from last year, and then they've got some young up-and-coming talent who I think are competing with Daniel Harris in Ellis Robinson IV and DeMello Jones heading into year 2 for both of them. Georgia's pieces for a key secondary. Young studs, they got it with KJ Bolden. If it's Ellis Robinson or DeMello Jones, they'll have it there. If not, Daniel Harris will man the second spot at the corner position. Up-and-coming talent, Janelle Aguero Jr., right? And then they brought in veteran leadership from the transfer portal. But a returning veteran leader in Dalen Everett. I think that's the biggest piece in the secondary. The fact that he returned, if he didn't, I wouldn't be speaking this confidently about Georgia's secondary unit. Remember, he will be a 3-year starter this year. That is a lot of snaps covering SEC wide receivers who are typically NFL bound, right? That's some reps. He covered Matthew Golden, first-round wide receiver this past year. Luther Burden, second-round wide receiver, right? He's got experience covering these really good players. He will be entering year 3 as a starter. I think that his return is super important. Remember how key he was in those 2 Texas games last year. Between those 2 games, 3 interceptions, a sack, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Those are in what were the 2, outside of the Notre Dame game Georgia lost, the 2 biggest games they had. Going on the road to play the number 1 team in the country, and then the SEC championship against that same team. So Dalen Everett was big in key spots. I think his return is super important for this Georgia defense. I want to talk about it more here over the coming weeks. KJ Bolden at safety. 5-star prospect that Georgia flipped at the last second from Florida State. He ended up being pretty much a full-time starter for Georgia in the secondary as a true freshman in 2025. He is now projected to have that jump, right, that Malachi Starks did, that all of these younger Georgia secondary players that got to start early on, people are expecting him to be one of the best defensive backs in all of college football. I expect it as well. I think he's got the speed and the instincts. I think with just a little bit more bulking up, we're talking about a legit first-round safety in a couple of years when we're talking about KJ Bolden. I really think that's what you get out of him. He'll be a true sophomore. He's going to be one of the best players on Georgia's team this year. Some people, I don't know who the best player on Georgia's team is this year. I think that's an interesting topic. I think KJ Bolden is in the running for them. Between that, they've got all sorts of talent and options in the secondary. Maybe it's not figured out in the first couple of weeks of the season. We've seen that in the past where things get rotated. I think that we'll see a combination of different 5 groups because Georgia typically plays with 5 secondary players, including that nickelback star position. So I think you'll see some rotation. I think Janelle Aguero is the leader in the clubhouse to be the star. At the safety spot, I don't know that Ja'Cory Thomas has as much of a stronghold on it over the transfers as Janelle Guerrero does, but Georgia's secondary has all of these pieces. All of these pieces put together is why I think they'll be more than just fun. I think it's going to be a very good unit yet again, especially when you just look at the history of it and the way that they've reloaded and regunned with these players. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below, and I appreciate you watching this video. Make sure you are going to dawgpost.com. It is important to us that you are going to the website and checking us out. Thank you.